Hello and welcome to this video. Thank you so much for tuning in and sharing this now moment with myself and with one another. The screen was a little frozen, so hopefully it's caught up now. If you haven't seen these videos before, welcome, and welcome back if you have. My intention with all of these videos is to assist in raising the frequency and the vibration with one another and on Mother Earth, and just to raise our awareness around ascension. And so without further ado, I'm just going to jump right into this. This is obviously, well, if you haven't seen these videos before, maybe not so obvious, but it's a KISS Keep It Simple Starseeds video. And usually in those videos, I give some type of well, today it's just going to be about light language. And the reason I'm going into what light language is because A, more and more people are speaking light language. B, I've had many sessions, I've worked with people who want to speak it or are speaking it. Well, I'll get to that in just a minute. But having said that, I was guided to redo this video that I did a while ago. And while they might be very similar, I'll probably delete that old video and give this as a more updated version. So I'm just going to jump right into it. I might share a little light language today with you guys, depending on what comes through. So I always try to be in flow, which means connected with my higher self, my guides, and all the beings that are assisting us for our highest and greatest good. So my intention, of course, is benevolence for all. So light language, one of the messages that I've been really getting a lot of lately is talk about light language, because more and more people are speaking light language. And so I'm just going to talk briefly and introduce, for me, this is from my perspective and from the perspective offered through my higher guides. Light language can be really in any form, and it's essentially light in form. So any type of language is technically a form of light from one perspective. From another perspective, it can be a higher vibrational sound. It can be a higher vibrational writing. It can be a higher vibrational piece of artwork. It can be higher vibrational hieroglyphs, and so on and so forth. But essentially, it's a form of communication. So that, however that communication is formed, is what forms this language of light, so to speak. And it has also been called in the past or referred to as speaking in ancient tongues or ancient tongue or speaking in tongues. And there's a lot of other words that are used to describe it, but essentially it's language. So oftentimes when someone speaks in tongues, they're speaking in a multi-diverse language. So we don't consider, if someone is speaking in English, Spanish, and German, speaking in tongues, even though they are speaking in multiple languages, because if someone is German, they understand what that means. If someone is speaking English, they understand what that means. However, if I hear someone speaking a language I don't understand, it sounds like gibberish to me, even though I know it has a form and it has a meaning. So all language that is light, has light behind it, has a vibrational frequency and it holds a meaning. So just because we can't understand it doesn't mean that we don't understand it on a cellular level. And I'll get to that in just a minute. So I just wanted to kind of give a little background of what it is. So there's also the form of ancient language, which can also be referred to as light language. So where is this language coming from? Well, where did English come from? Where did German come from? Where did, and we're going to go backwards a little bit. So whatever your belief system is, I just ask you to be open-minded, because this is all, of course, from my perspective. And I have a very multi-dimensional perspective, so this might get a little bit out there, but we're just having fun with this. And the more open-minded I am about all of this, the more messages come through that allow me to understand things in a little different way. So I see it as a form of communication in many different forms. And so we're going to start with the speech though first. And so back to, where did our English language come from? Where did our writing method come from? I guess I'm also talking about writing. It all came from somewhere. So we have many civilizations that we don't know anything about. Even there, people are even finding civilizations built that we thought were ancient civilizations built on top of civilizations that were even older than that. There's things buried in the desert that we have yet to discover. There's things being discovered under the ice in Antarctica, right? And so this goes on and on and on. And there's even things that we've discovered many years ago that we don't fully understand. And in that mishmash of everything are languages that have been lost. They haven't been written down, or the documents that they did write them down on were lost or destroyed. And so if we don't have that group of beings able to then speak in that continued light language, or we'll just call it communication, it gets lost, and or what's the right word, when something's watered down through the years. And so now we have this form of communication, and I'm just going to call it English for now. It can be any language from German to Dutch to all of the Native American languages, and then all of the sub-languages and dialects that exist within each of those areas. So I could go on and on about that. Just like there are different, so these teachings are essentially starting to come through. People are starting to remember these ancient lost languages and tones. And I'm going to get to that a little bit later. So I just want to touch on the basics. So we already just kind of went over that light language is a form of communication. It can be in spoken, written. It can even be in sign language, which I didn't really put here. I'll have to add that to my mix, right? Hieroglyphs, sign language, which is symbols, right? I'm gonna pause this. Okay, so I wrote down symbols and signs. So as we get into this light language, essentially what happens is communication in form, which is information. So if you break down what that means is we're forming some type of connection between beings, right? And so this can come in the form of, so a lot of people think light language is just spoken. And light language, oh, before I forget, so I'll go backwards. Where is it coming from? So essentially what I just touched on was ancient and lost civilizations. And I'm going to start there, and then I'll branch out a little bit more from that. So oftentimes what's happening is people are starting to speak this language, or they hear the language and it makes them feel good. And I mentioned earlier in the description that it was a higher vibrational language, and that's not necessarily 100% accurate, because any language can be a language if you don't understand it, and they're you know, meaning it just feels good to a lot of people because they remember it. It sounds like home. However, there is also a higher vibrational language as well that holds different frequencies, tones, and notes in the words. I'm going to use Sanskrit as an example. In yoga, we were taught as yoga teachers, or if you've gone to a yoga class, they'll say a lot of the asanas or the movements, and they'll give a name to it with in Sanskrit. And Sanskrit is a very pure type of language. And literally it holds a vibration or tone or geometry or frequency around the words. That's why oftentimes, not mudras, but, and of course I can't think of the name right now. Either way, the repetition of certain words over and over and over again triggers an activation, so to speak, or a shift in frequency. And so that is where that ancient language of Sanskrit has that very beautiful vibration associated with it, because it hasn't been watered down, much like the English language has, and there hasn't been a lot of mishing-mashing of all of these other frequency meanings, etc., etc. So oftentimes that light language is coming through from higher vibration merely because the combination of the words elicits a certain frequency, tone, or sound that elicits or causes or creates, or think of it as a chemical reaction, if you will, a certain feeling within the body, within the memory, within the emotions, whatever it might be. So that is why oftentimes, from a very broad perspective, people that hear Sanskrit or repeat over and over again certain affirmations, I'm using affirmation just as a very general term, that's why it feels a certain way. So we have, Om, Om, and all of the other Sanskrit terms, which I'm not getting into. They elicit a certain vibration. And just like with the chakras, you have Om, Lam, Vam, Om, Hum. Hum is throat, Om, crown, or Mother Earth. So much is associated with that. And also vowels in general. A, E, I, O, U, oo, Om, all have a certain frequency associated with it. So with light language or ancient tones, they hold this pattern within them. And that is why people feel so good, generally speaking, from a very broad perspective, when they hear it. The other reason people feel good is what I mentioned. They remember it. It sounds like home to them. They think, I spoke that. Or their body recognizes it, or their memory recognizes it from whatever it might be, a past life, a past incarnation, a future incarnation, which we're going to get into that a little bit later, if you believe in those sorts of things. And also it could be in the DNA. So the DNA is coming online, it's remembering these tones and frequencies, and all of a sudden you hear it and it's like, wow, why do I feel so good? But the first explanation that I just gave, as far as the combination of the letters and the sounds mixed and morphed together, is part of what creates that higher feeling, that emotional response. Just like if somebody plays a piece on the piano, it is played in certain keys and frequencies that create this emotional response within ourselves. Okay, so because light language is a form of communication, I'm not going into the full, I talked about the lost civilizations. There's also a form of light language that can be written. It can be done in movement, through toning, and also artwork, etc. Any form of communication where these higher vibrational shapes, geometries, sounds, tones hold a pattern of information, right? Information that are then presented in any of those forms, and they can be symbols and signs as well. So you might hear someone speaking an ancient tone or light language, and I'll get into that in just a little bit. You might see someone making the symbols. There's people that do it in artwork, and I'll include some links on this when I remember, for some of those different modalities. So yoga, for example, I'm using this as an example, is kind of a basic form of light language. You've got asanas or movement that represent a certain frequency that then harmonize within the body, and so is dance, right? Taichi, Qigong, all of those are playing with energy. Reiki, which I didn't really write down, but for those of you who are Reiki healers, right? When you go through an attunement, you learn certain symbols that you either write down, you say, or you can make in the air. And they represent or hold certain information in some sort of form that is then communicated in one form through ourselves as conduits, for example. So the conduit can be a human, or it can be a being of any form. It can be in ink, paper. It's a holding of this pattern, and essentially with the being, it's sending it through. You know, the Native Americans believed that if you took a picture, it captured part. It's light. It's a stamp, right? So when we make certain symbols, they represent certain information, and it can be felt. That's why Reiki, for example, can be very powerful. that's why yoga can be very powerful, among so many other reasons. And so in essence, when you combine that with certain mudras, movements, hand movements, gestures, right? Certain sounds, om, 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 right? Or some of the beautiful songs in Sanskrit, movements, right? It allows this energy to flow through and expressed in light, okay? So that's a really good example of a form of communication that essentially shifts, or Taichi or Qigong. You're essentially moving energy around. And that's a different video. I'm not going to get into that so much. But lost writings, hieroglyphs. Now, I haven't really touched on, this is ancient. So these come from ancient Sumeria, Asia, Egypt, certain places that we don't even know about yet, really. But also, we're going to take it down a little deeper or a little farther out there. We've got lost civilizations. How about Atlantis? How about messages many of you guys have heard of the Hathors? How about Lemuria? And if any of these ring a bell, literally ring a bell, right? Sound, and feel like goosebumps can sometimes be deja vu. Why does that sound so familiar? Because it's resonating with your memory, with your structure, with your system, so to speak. So that might be another place where this language came from. And if we want to take it a step further, many believe that we were seeded from the stars. Our ancestors or ancient ancestors that were from Sirius or Lyra or Andromeda, or maybe all of those. We might have brothers and sisters in the Pleiades. So if any of these, Arcturian, right? So that's a whole other ball of wax, if you will. And essentially we could take that a step further and say, where did this language come from? Well, perhaps, look at ancient Egypt and how it was built in alignment with, Orion and all of that, and the star system of Sirius and so on and so forth. And many people have heard of, beings coming down, angels coming down. And I'm not getting into the history of that, but essentially, perhaps they brought a little flavor of their language with them. And we don't have it necessarily because it's been so watered down or lost or destroyed over the years. And so that may be a part of where this language came from as well. So some of these languages will not just sound like a certain frequency or tone that's ancestral, like or it can be very Native American. And there's many different dialects in amongst those flavors. I'm using those as an example because they have a tendency to be very earth-rooted, yet connected to different star systems as well. Sometimes it can be a very, sounds like there can be multitude of frequencies kind of embedded into the sounds that are coming through the channeler or the person. We'll just call all beings conduits. So this frequency that's coming through the conduit, whether it's coming from, and that's another, we're going to go into another section on that. So all of these sounds are essentially coming through, or forms, and they can come through in different ways. And just like you have the English language written, or Sanskrit, or Spanish, or wherever you want to go with this, some of those come in hieroglyphic form. We don't even understand much of what was written in ancient Egypt, let alone what was written in many of these civilizations that have yet to be fully discovered or understood. I brought up, I wrote down sound bowls. If you guys have ever done a healing with sound bowls, so I have one here, right? This resonates at a certain frequency. It brings through a certain vibration. My favorite one to use is 432 hertz. oftentimes the combinations of the words, the letters, so on and so forth, and I'm not playing it full steam right now, are in part vibrating at some of those frequencies, right? Geometries. So I talked a little bit about the language and gave just a couple examples just now of what it might sound like. And it's different for everyone. Just like if you live in the United States, it certainly doesn't mean that you won't have an accent or a dialect or even certain words that are completely different than what somebody from another, not even from a state within the United States would have, but a different region of that state. If you've got somebody coming from, well, California and Florida are kind of melting pots, but let's say you've got someone in the South and they're from the heart of New Orleans, and then they go to Michigan, they're going to sound completely different. And there's even words and linguistics that are used that may not be understood outside of that region. So think of that and spread it out throughout the entire world. That's what light language is, the same thing. So you might have somebody that says they're speaking Pleiadian, and it might sound completely different from someone else who is also speaking Pleiadian or whatever it might be. Also, the message that I was getting from my guides is that some of it is a morphing of multiple languages that are essentially enmeshed within each other, and that we can still understand because we might have multiple flavors. So for example, I always bring up that I feel very connected to my Native American heritage from this lifetime in my blood from my ancestors, right? But from my past life or future life, everything is happening now. However you want to look at it, I have connections or parallel realities, which I'm not getting into. I'm just trying to present from multiple perspectives. I go into meditation and I connect with my Aboriginal ancestors, with my ancestors that are out in some rainforest that I still don't know where they are. I connect with Hathors. I connect with many different beings or versions of myself because I am multidimensional, and that will come through because it's part of me. So essentially, those are going to be multiple dialects, and we all have that potential to understand multiple languages. So, okay, I brought that up a little bit, past, present, and future. So one of the biggest things that I wanted to share with this is more and more people are either hearing it and feeling it. And I already explained as to why they might be feeling it because of the combination of the words and such. They might be hearing it and at the same time feel like they're following along with it, which is what happened when I first started hearing it as well. I had already been speaking it in my mind when I was doing Reiki or energy sessions, energy healing sessions, but I didn't realize that that's what it was. I just kind of thought it was just a bunch of gibberish, but then I recognized it as actually a language. And I heard someone speaking it, and as they were speaking it, I was speaking it too, which is also a form of telepathy, which I'll get into in a completely different video. But sometimes if, let's say, for example, you learn a certain affirmation, I am that I am, right? Or I am love. Now you hear that in another language that intuitively you know what they're saying because you speak it. Therefore, someone might say, I am that I am. They might be speaking it in light language or in a form that is essentially the same general meaning. And as they say, I am, you are saying in your mind that I am. Finishing those sentences. I'm getting goosebumps. I love it when that happens. So a lot of people are experiencing that. They hear someone speaking light language and they're like, how did I know what they were going to say? But I didn't really understand what they were saying, but I was saying it in my mind. Am I going crazy? So that'll happen. Whew, happening a lot, apparently. A lot of times what I get is messages for the collective in these videos. Of course, this is messages for people that I've worked with, beautiful starseeds, who I promised I would do a video about this because they've been asking me about this as well. The other layer that might happen out of this light language movement information is you hear it and you don't necessarily understand it, but you feel it all throughout your body. It can stir up emotions. It can trigger certain memories. It can trigger synchronicities. Some people see things, whether it be color, shapes, or pictures that flash into their head really quickly. All of this is different for everyone, and it all means different things. And it essentially is light encoded information or a vibration. Just like if you hear a tuning fork at 432 hertz, your heart opens up, right? Or you feel it in your heart. That then, therefore, I don't think I said that right, but I'm going to get to that in just a moment. So that then triggers certain synchronicities to happen. So while the language might come through, you may not understand it in that moment. But then that night, you might have an activation occur in dream time because it shifted your cellular structure somehow in the form of just like getting energy work. You go get energy work, you go get cranial sacral, even doing a massage can help to pull out some of these memories that are held within the body, because the body isn't just a physical structure. It literally is a tuning fork. We are conduits. We are tuning forks. Water holds memory. Water is in all of us. Our bones are crystal. That's a whole other video. Crystallized structures. Everything is vibrating. We respond to these vibrations. So if someone is singing, speaking, toning, or doing whatever it might be that elicits a certain frequency, we feel it, and therefore we might pull up things that we associate with that frequency, or it helps us to clear some of that stuff that has been held in the body. This can also not only be physical, it can be the emotional body, the etheric body, the causal body. Think of those, without going into all of that, think of yourself as a nesting doll. And within these layers, before things become physically manifest, they kind of hang out in your field, so to speak, and then eventually make formation. And then this becomes a physical manifestation. So if you're hearing a sound, yes, it's coming into your ears and your crystals in your ears, which is physical, but first it has to travel through the ether, through the air, through the elements that you are connected to that surround your body in different light formations, and then it comes into the physical form. So you're feeling it on many different levels. I brought up telepathy, not to be confused with the fish tilapia, but telepathy is essentially, you can be picking up on frequencies because you're resonating or harmonizing within that frequency. Therefore, you're on the same bandwidth, and that's why some people are hearing the language and speaking it at the same time or realizing it. Then there's other people who hear it and then they start speaking it too, because they are remembering that they can. It's activating a potential within the field. So they're guiding me to talk a little bit about the locks and the keys. So think of, okay, I'm just kind of thinking of like Ariel and the Little Mermaid, and Ursula the Witch. You know, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen Little Mermaid, you should definitely watch it if you haven't seen it. But essentially her voice is trapped and she can't sing, and she gets her voice back, and essentially it's almost more like the sirens, right? The mermaid sirens. There's been years, and we all know that music and the voice and the harmonics trigger certain things. So when we hear opera, when we hear someone singing in beautiful tones, or we hear music, it is basically unlocking things in our field, so to speak, in our matrix, and then it gets that moving. It creates a flow, it creates a pattern, and it's almost like this interweaving interconnectedness, or this puzzle piece that then unlocks certain codons, memories, physical, etc., etc., etc. Therefore, then the person may remember, speak it, feel it, whatever it might be, draw it, etc. Start moving, right? Okay, so I talked a little bit about past, present, and future. I talked about the galactic realms. We are all made up of the stuff of stars. We have the same chemical components in our body as the stars, right? As Mother Earth. So we are connected with all things. And I have to just bring up a little bit about like the holographic. There's, I don't know if it's the Secret Life of Plants, but it talks about how if you cut a piece of a plant and then you look at it under this particular type of photography, you can still see the whole plant, or if you look at it, its DNA. I'm not sure what the picture is there, but you get the point. So everything is in everything. So even if something is cut off, that memory is still there in the DNA or in the imprint, if you will, of that plant. So essentially, we have that in us from all of these different places, all of these different experiences. And I'm not going to get too much into the DNA aspect of it. That's a separate video. But before I get into that, so we've got this version of ourselves. We've got this version of ourselves. So all of it's inside of us. So that's part of what we're activating or remembering in this ascension journey. Last but not least, not last, I want to talk a little bit about the DNA, and then I want to talk a little bit about the order of language and all of that, because that's been another question. And I'll probably do a second follow-up video to this. But basically, the DNA is not just a physical thing. Just like our body isn't physical, we're a tuning fork, right? We vibrate. So does the DNA is not just inside of us. That's a whole other video. But what I am seeing is that essentially the DNA is activating and it's morphing, it's changing. We're going from carbon-based to more of a crystalline base, which again is not the subject here, but it's important to bring up because we've, several months ago, I was getting a lot of synchronicities about foxes and I kind of just put it aside to, we could take that meaning as the spiritual Native American belief system and saying, okay, fox means camouflage. It means fitting into your surroundings. It means morphing and kind of going into foxes, you know, really are anyways, that's not the point of this. My point is it led me to looking up through synchronicity the FOXP2 gene. And it just so happened that this was going on while my throat chakra, not just chakra, DNA, was fully coming online. So the FOXP2 gene has something to do with all of this. And essentially it's been activated within all of us. Whether or not it turns, so I guess it's like we could take this to the negative format. Doctors say everybody has the genes or the cells for cancer in them. It just is a matter of if they activate those cells or not. Now, not that I completely agree with that, but let's just use that as an example. Well, then that would mean that everybody has this FOXP2 gene in them, and whether we turn that on or activate it or not is based on our blueprint or how we are ascending. And I do feel strongly in the messages that I've been getting are basically stating that we are helping to activate one another, because the genes, it's like dominoes, you know, one touches another, we spread that love, we share the light, and it is contagious. So it's almost like, yes, that gene has been in us dormant, possibly from one perspective, and now that FOXP2 gene is being activated, and through this is speech, and through this, what is a gene though? It's not just how we do something. Why? Where does it come from? Where does this ability come from? Our ancestry, right? Our records. That's what the DNA is. It's a bridge, right, to the past, the present, the future, all it is. So we are activating these potentials within our gene field, so to speak, among so many other things, and we are then activating this within other people. That is why when people have been emailing me or I've been in sessions and they're like, oh, I started speaking light language after watching your videos or other people's videos, not just mine. that's what we do. We're starseeds. We're lighting each other up, right? We're helping each other to kind of, and I might talk to another starseed. I'm getting goosebumps. It's so much fun. I might talk to another person, even just through Instagram, who I'm not doing a session with, and they send me a bunch of info, and I go right into light language, because something about that information triggered something within me to then activate a memory on a whole other level. And that's what essentially we're doing with one another. And that's another video, but I wanted to kind of just touch briefly on that. Also, how does this come up? So I'm going to go into this into a little bit longer. So if you're not, if that's enough for you, you can just call it a day and then move on. Otherwise, I'm going to go a little deeper into this and talk about how people start speaking it. I will provide some links of some other teachers who helped, I don't want to say activated or triggered me, but maybe they did and I just didn't know it. But I really enjoyed listening to them when I was first learning that this is what I was doing. And I will also, some of those teachers have classes on how to learn light language. I'm just going to say the basics or teach the basics. I'm not even teaching. I'm just kind of sharing, which is teaching essentially. And how does this happen? I already gave a bunch of examples on how it can happen. It can be triggered through reading light language, looking at light language, artwork, shapes, hieroglyphs, signs, symbols, movement. One of my star brothers, I'm going to give an example, Romeo, he does movement. If you guys watch that, you may feel a certain way from watching his flow. He is moving in living light form. I have other starseeds that I've worked with that do it through their hands. I do it through my hands. When I do a lot of the videos, you guys have seen me spin and all of that. I just met another beautiful starseed canvas god essence who does it through just writing. And she also does some movement and brings it through. Everybody has their own style. I'm going to provide, there's an artist, and I can't remember your, apologies. I will provide your link if you don't mind me sharing. There's a couple of different artists that have connected with me who watch these videos who draw light language. You might find those very activating as well. It doesn't have to be through, again, these things. Sometimes it can just happen spontaneously. For me, it just started, okay, so we'll start with how can I get activated? So those are some ways to do it. It might just start doing it spontaneously. For me, it started while I was doing healing work. It was just coming through. It's different for everyone. I'm going to go into what are some signs that this is what's happening. Okay, and who is it? What is it? I'm not really going to go into that very much. The reason is because from my perspective, my guidance team, if it feels good, at first it can be a little freaky. Stay out of judgment about yourself and about what other people have told you. I was raised very religious, and you know, speaking in tongues was a big no-no, even though it was in the Bible. There is, okay, I'm going to end, that'll be at the end of the video. Let's keep going in this flow though, because I don't want to lose what are some of the signs? So how do I know if I'm speaking it, or so we'll come back to that in just a minute too. So first I want to touch on how, to activate it and to trigger it. This can also be triggered through reading certain people's writings. Magenta Pixie, Lisa Transcendence Brown are some really good examples. I started writing, and I feel like what I write comes through. I'm certainly not by any means comparing myself to those two beautiful way showers and lovely ladies. But I love their work, and I feel very drawn to share it with everybody because they have two totally different styles, and what they are providing are codes and activations in their own way. Some people will feel it and some people won't. And that's why I wanted to just go into, so many people are doing their own thing about this, and it's really good because somebody might watch one of my videos and go, okay, that was just weird. I don't know what she's doing with her hands, and I don't know what that toning is all about. And the way she writes, it doesn't even make any sense. There's no order to it. So that might drive somebody nuts, and they might need a specific, Other people are really visual, and that's where they would get benefit from magenta. Other people like the writing and the teaching style of Lisa. So I'm just using that as an example. They inspire me. And so I write in such a way. Another person that I've come across, I'm just going to provide the links, and that way you guys can just research it all on your own. But when I write in my blog, it is written in code. It is encoded in light language, even though it's written in English, because it's coming through in a formation that is carrying information in a certain order, presentation, that then activates, triggers certain harmonics within the body. So I wanted to share that a little bit too, because sometimes you might read somebody's writing and you might go, I don't know, that just has no rhyme or reason to it. But it's a little bit like Alice in Wonderland. There are a lot of parallels, hidden meanings, and mishmashed words that actually trigger the imagination. And that's why Lewis Carroll, I believe, was so talented. Many people don't realize that when they read his writing, it actually is a form of light language. The book Anastasia, if you've ever read that, whether it's real or not is irrelevant. When you read it, you feel a certain way. That's encoded with a form of light language. So, and I don't want that to be confused with encoded with light language. There might be a different perspective about what that means. I'm just talking about from my own perspective on how I share in my writings, and how other people share in their artwork. It's that form that creates these certain frequencies and feelings. Order. This doesn't necessarily happen in any particular order. In addition to that, if you're writing and you're getting all these downloads and activations, keep it going. Don't worry about whether it makes sense or not, because it is multi-dimensional. None of this is linear, right? It's extrasensory oftentimes. So, but not only the order that we're writing in, some of you starseeds out there that I've worked with, you know who I'm talking to right now, have shared this information, and I'm like, I'm just going to do a video about it. So if you're writing and it's just a bunch of jabberwocky, right, as Lewis Carroll will call it, I think, just keep it going. Eventually, it will make sense, or eventually it might make sense. And either way, it doesn't matter. It doesn't. It's just a way to get it out. It's been pent up in all these years in your DNA, and it's just like, ah. It wants to come out. Let it come out. Start talking. You don't have to do anything with it. I talked about this in a previous video I did the last couple of videos. People start speaking light language and they go, well, what do I do with it? Where did it come from? I have to share this with the world, but I don't want to share it with the world. I don't know what I'm saying. Don't worry about it. If you feel guided to share it, share it. But if you don't, and it just feels like you have this urge to do something, it may not be that that's the only route to share your gifts. It could be a completely different way. And this is just a gateway into something else. So a lot of times people start speaking light language and then they just kind of lose interest in it, because really all it did was activate other things for them. And that's okay too. It's not like you're obligated to use it in some way. Oops, I'm gonna pause this. It's just do what you need to do to get it out into your creativity. So that's leading me into the order of things. So for me, I was speaking it in my mind. And for me, when my throat started, or when I think the FOXP2 gene really came online, I'm going to just go into this a little bit. Actually, I won't tell my whole story. I'm just going to say that it can come in the form of toning. You might just feel like singing all the time, and you may not be a singer. I have no musical training, mathematical training, scientific training, yet when you start activating all this information comes in. It's so much fun. And I certainly invite you guys, don't judge yourself. I do it. I have a tendency to go, who am I to share this information? But who is anybody? We all have access to this, right? Where does anybody get their information from? That's a whole other video. My point is, don't worry about it. Just allow it to flow. Sing if you feel like singing. Even if you feel like an idiot. I didn't even like oming when I started teaching yoga in 2012. Well, when I first started taking yoga, I didn't like oming. By the time I was done with teacher training and understood what it meant, I was like, man, this is awesome. But my point is, I was very shy, and so just let it come out, because it is a vibration. And if you don't want to share it, you don't have to, but if you want to record it, you can always record it on your phone, go back and listen to it, and then delete it. If you're guided to paint or draw, don't ignore it. I was guided to write forever, basically since I was in 6th grade. And I did write, but I never quite understood what I was supposed to be writing until now. So that's another message that comes through, is be patient with yourself. Just because you start speaking or drawing light language, ancestral tones, future, doesn't mean that you're going to have, that's it. That's the end all. It isn't. It's a doorway into something else, or it's just like an added bonus, right? It just feels good. And that's really what this is all about. It's just feeling. And in feeling good, when you listen to it or actually participate in it, you're still participating by listening to it and setting your intention. That is what this is all about, is shifting the frequency and the vibration with one another and on Mother Earth, because we're all connected. So don't worry about the order that it comes in. Also pay attention to, if you just want to start speaking, like if you are like those, so for me, it wasn't just singing. I was getting a lot of, I mean, just play with it. Because if you're going to music training, they have you do all these weird noises to help create range, I guess, in your, and this is just coming through, guys. I don't really know much about music. I'm just starting to learn little bits and pieces. I bought the book Quadrivium, and my 3rd dimensional brain is blown. So my point is, don't worry about all of that. If you are musically trained or mathematical or into sacred geometry, kudos to you, because it'll probably make perfect sense and you'll get everything that I'm saying. But my point is, just allow it to come through and play with the sounds. So that's another way that you can start learning it, so to speak. Don't force it, because if you're forcing it, that's when the gibberish is, but at the same time, if gibberish is coming through, always set your intention for it to be benevolence for all. That way you feel comfortable with what's coming out, because if you're scared or in a place of fear, you probably just want to relax and just do the toning and the sounds until that feels comfortable enough. And if words start to come through, set your intention. You're a divine sovereign being. You are a conduit, but you choose and set your boundaries as to what you want to come out. So I would, my intention is for the benevolence for all, in alignment with the highest levels of love light only. Boom. That's it. Drawing, painting, movement. So even though I was speaking in my mind, I was hearing it. I was also at the same time having mudras activate, and because I was doing energy healing, the symbols were activating as well. So technically, in the order for me, mine came through in writing, then it came through in hand gestures and movements, which is actually movement. And then several years ago, in yoga, I would start doing these weird gyrations, weird movements. And it would be really crazy strong. And I just went with it. My neck would start turning, I would just have these movements happen. And at first it freaked me out. I was in a place of fear. I was going through a lot of ascension symptoms, which is a whole other video. But if you just kind of allow that to happen, it's almost like your body is tuning in with this happening, these shifts that are going on. It might start, so I'm just saying that it might already be happening for you in these movements of energy and playing with that. I have mudras that come through. Yes, I'm a yoga teacher, but I never was interested in learning the mudras because they were very confusing to me. So I just was like, okay, the mudras and even the Sanskrit. I loved saying the yoga names in Sanskrit, but the teachers and the Sanskrit, it was complicated for my third dimensional dense, we'll just call it what it was. And so it was more for me, I'm sharing that, about just relaxing. Okay, so the order of things, I talked a little bit about that. Last but not least, how do I know? So those are some of those signs that you know if you're speaking light language. I already kind of talked about what to do with it. Nothing, just create, have fun. You don't have to do anything with it. It's part of our innate ability. That's like saying, I speak English, therefore I must talk and share what it is that I'm saying. Sure, of course you want to, but it doesn't mean you have to go and announce it from a podium unless you feel like you've got something to say that is from the heart. Also, connecting with the heart, of course, is really important. Connecting with your highest, your oversoul, if you want to call it that, your most benevolent aspect of you, whatever resonates with you, God, source energy. So setting that up as well. Signs, I kind of already went through. So if you are speaking light language, and I'm going to end on this, if you are speaking things, saying things, writing things, drawing things, again, as long as it feels good and you're in your heart and you're in a place of love and compassion and you set that intention, that's honoring what you're doing as a gift, as artwork, and not just allow it to kind of create what it is that you feel guided to do. For myself, it felt like there were just these years that I had been holding in that just wanted to burst out. And that's where I eventually started doing this on YouTube. I was doing this for a long time before I started doing the videos. So I wanted to share that as well. So don't put pressure on yourselves. But you could share it with friends. You know, you could do a group of people that you know, maybe you've got different groups of people that want to get together and play. And also, you know, for my guidance team, this is not my area of expertise to say, oh, you're speaking this language, you're speaking that language. I know there's some people that specifically do that, so I'll try to provide their link as well in this. I'll keep adding links to this video once I get all the information together. So you might want to come back and check it out. I'll write it in the description. It's not like you have to go back and watch this over and over again. But that way you can kind of check out those links that are on there, because I'll keep adding to it as I get more information about who to learn from. And of course, I'm more than happy to work with someone if they want to learn how to do this. I absolutely would love to share or show you or do what I know how. But essentially, I'm just giving you a very basic way to use this information to maybe learn from it, just even from this video. But if you want to work one-on-one, you want to do, you know, a series of practicing or whatever it might be, you can go to my website. And all the other links I'm going to provide with all of these other amazing teachers that might specialize in that. So for me, I know I connect with all of these other beings. You may not know who you're connecting with. If you don't feel comfortable, then don't do it. It's that simple. Or if sometimes people's intuition comes online before their heart comes online. And I'm going to end on this note. It is about fully connecting to you as your higher self and being in a space of love. And sometimes these energies that come through or memories of languages that might just be in your DNA can freak you out. If you don't feel comfortable speaking it, don't do it. Or if it's just because you don't know what it is, you can work on expanding that a little bit more. Meaning, am I in my heart? Am I in my head? Am I connected to my higher self? Where am I at? What vibration am I holding when this comes through? You know, so the higher vibration you can be in, the more comfortable you'll feel speaking it, and the more that will help you, not just make you in a bigger place of fear. Does that make sense? So some people start speaking it and then they're like, oh my goodness, that's too scary. And then they get, you don't want it to put you in a place of fear, but ultimately if your DNA is activating, it's activating. And sometimes it can activate, I feel, one chakra might come into awareness before another one, or out of order a little bit. Does that make sense? So if you, this is the most important part to work on, working on know thyself. So it's not about the language. It's not about speaking light language or understanding it or knowing who you're connecting with. It's about knowing yourself first, so that when you do connect with these other languages, you can feel and know that it is good, that it is, and that's really for your own sense of well-being, if that makes sense. Grounding, anchoring these energies and not being all over the place can help also these languages to come through. So I just wanted to share that. I really hope that's helpful. I'm sure there's a lot more that I could have gone into. I talked a little bit about the shape, the geometry, and the structure. So I'll end on that, just recognizing that it's all about resonance. It's about being in the heart. It's about spreading the love and sharing that light. It doesn't have to be, there are a lot of beautiful starseeds that I've worked with that want to speak light language, but there is this aspect of them that is still in a place of working on themselves, and that's okay. It doesn't mean we don't have to rush it. You don't have to speak this. You don't have to draw it. You don't have to. You could just listen to it and enjoy it. And in doing that, it might bring forth some beautiful writing in English that you didn't know you were really, or that you were wanting to do. It might bring forth just a part of you that isn't necessarily this other version of yourself, if that makes sense. So what I mean by that is all of this stuff, all of these extrasensory things are great. But if your third eye comes on or your kundalini activates and you're not anchored and grounded in yourself, you, I guess, what do they say? Be careful what you wish for, right? So oftentimes people go, I want, or let me, I know once I start speaking light language, that'll be it. It's not. It's just a doorway. It's cool. It's fun. And it makes me feel great. I love it. But that isn't all that I do all day long, although some days it's kind of what I want to do. But again, I was reminded to remind everybody that that's just one tiny part of the bigger picture. It is so much more important to hold that vibration and frequency in the form of love and compassion, and everything else will fall into place, and not judging ourselves based on, well, how come they can do it and I can't, or how come I can't do it yet. I hear that all of the time, and I get it. I was there too. I still do it sometimes. I'll hear or see, or there's something beautiful that someone does and I'll go, oh, I want to do that. It used to be, though, for me, well, how come I can't do that? Or why am I not doing that? You know, I was in that place, which for me was pulling me out of that frequency, like, wow, I want to do that too. Maybe that'll happen for me. That's that excitement of like, and then I don't put a time limit on it. Like, I need to do this now. That blocks it. That blocks all of this stuff, because it takes you out of being present and in coherence and in the heart, and it puts you into future mode, right? Or another frequency that isn't in harmony with being present. And a lot of this is about being present. And when you go into meditation and this starts to come through, again, it isn't about the light language, it's about how you're feeling when it comes through, because that's what's important. So I hope that helps. Like I said, there's probably a lot more. If you guys have questions, you're more than welcome to email me. Apologies on the length of time it's taking me to get back to my emails, unless I happen to be checking them right when you email me. Faster usually to do it through my website, but the website I'm working on as well, because I was having some hiccups. And you can always comment as long as I have these comments still going on YouTube. That's always a place too that I'll answer questions sometimes so everybody can see them. And of course, you're more than welcome to visit me on carrieavon.com and book a session if you feel guided to. But like I said, this I think is happening to a lot of people. It's not necessary to take classes on it unless you really, 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 really want to, and you feel like it's part of what you're supposed to be doing, and you feel like it could be fun. It's all about having fun, right? And that's where it's important. And then you would definitely benefit from that. And I am going to include those other teachers who offer classes specifically on that. So in love and light, namaste, you guys. Have fun creating